Okay, I'm going to continue reading tonight The Devil of Massachusetts, Chapter 10, Puritan Night. During these troubled days in early May, the frigate Nonsuch from England was bearing its way closer to the New England coast. It carried two notables, one of whom was now urgently needed to unsnarl the legal tangle created by the arrest of so many witches. This was the new royal governor, Sir William Phillips. His companion was Increase Mather, president of Harvard, pastor of the Second Church, father of Cotton, and for going on 4 years, ambassador extraordinaire from Massachusetts to England. Wow. As the two stood at the rail together, straining their eyes for a sign of landfall, they were not thinking of the witchcraft. They had not heard of it. And anyway, their minds were taken up with problems that looked weightier. Mather's mind was on the charter he was at last bringing Massachusetts. It was not the old charter restored, but the new one, and there was the rub. He had not been sent to fetch a new charter, that he had done so, consenting to compromise after all these years of fruitless attempts to retrieve the old privileges would be regarded in some theocratic quarters, as he was well aware, as desertion. Mather had already anticipated this viewpoint. He had drafted a document describing his work in England, first at the court of King James, then of William and Mary, and setting forth the reason of his capitulation. This is not so bad, he had written of the new charter, and the words so clearly fitted the lameness of his achievement and the low state of his present enthusiasm that his pen had paused here. Then he resolutely pushed it on to around off a proper period. Take it with all faults, and it is not so bad. But when I have left New England, the inhabitants would gladly have parted with many of thousands pounds that have obtained ones so good. He reviewed the incontestably good points of charter. Actually, it gave privileges in some particulars better than those formerly enjoyed. It did not meddle with local government. Laws would be made and local taxes levied, as in the past, by the General Court, whose representatives the people would continue to elect. All the general privileges of English citizenship threatened by Andros and the land titles had been confirmed to the people. Let them remember, if they were disgruntled by other provisions, by how narrow the margin Mather had saved them. Not that he asked thanks from the supreme humiliation. William, soon after coming to the throne, had sent to the colonies a circular letter confirming the last royal governors in office, but for the alertness of Mather's friends informing him of his move and his energetic action, the letter would have gone to Boston, and Boston would have been placed under the unthinkable obligation of recalling the deposed Andros from his confinement in Castle Island and setting him up in the townhouse again. Whatever Mather had done or had not done, he had saved Boston from that. Something like a smile passed over Mather's aus- austere, yet not unhandsome face. In his wig, he looked not unlike the late John Milton. As he recalled, as he recalled how he had presented the moment. Sorry, as he recalled how he had presented the fact of the revolution in Boston to King William, it was a moment calling for all his diplomacy, even if England had just consummated a revolution now referred to since it had succeeded as glorious. That was no indication that England would take a sympathetic view of revolutions irresponsibly set in motion in Boston. I presume your majesty has been informed of the great service which your subjects in England have done for your majesty. He had begun in an interview at Hampton Court on 4 July. This is tone skillfully evasive and of any hint of apology, any suggestion of irregularity, and had been accepted. But Mather's smile faded as he thought of what other provisions the charter contained. It would the godly say. What would the godly say when they learned that the uh, elect, electorate was no longer to be limited to members of the covenant, but broadened to include uh, property members of every Christian sect this side of paspatry. This was a revolutionary invocation. Those consequences would be incalculable. Uh, Hitherto, the limitations of the privilege of voting to the elect had been the very cornerstone of theocracy. It had been a wise and humane provision designed to keep the faithful in control, even when, as had long ago become the case, they were heavily outnumbered by lesser men without the covenant. God, who had not designated the majority of men to salvation, surely never intended for the damned to rule. Yet now, under the new charter, it very much looked like as they might. Mather was heavily aware that this was the aspect of his compromise that would require the most explaining. Not even the provision that Massachusetts used now for 5 decades to electing its own governors, yet must hereafter submit to an appointee of the crown, would rise such furious opposition in this dangerous broadening of the uh, electorate. Though Mather was too tough a soldier of the Lord to sink from difficulties, he faced the task ahead of him without pleasure. Uh, Elijah Cook and Dr. Oakes to work. Dr. Oakes sent to work the sent to work with him in the latter stages of negotiation, had refused to sign a charter containing such provisions and had gone home ahead of him to denounce him from doing so. Mather, too, would have rejected it if there had been any possible alternative, but there was not. The upright Puritan had not spent these years in court, at 2 consecutive courts, without learning something of statecraft and compromise. Politics, he now knew, was a matter of tackling with the wind, and God who sends the wind must have willed it so. Uh, Having failed to set the whole, he would not reject the half. To do so, to be condemned, Massachusetts to drift rudderless indefinitely. It had already drifted too long. Who knew what sickness of spirit might not be bred there if some measure of security were not restored? Um, I'm just gonna say this real quick. Reading this book, I forget that it's history because of just how insane some of this stuff sounds. But it is a part of history. Uh, Yet Mather, leaning on the rail of the non such in a kind of resolute dependency, knew that if it were not so patently God's will, he would hardly have gone home at all. It was, in fact, still home, the most stimulating years of his life. Soon after Harvard, as a student of Trinity College in Dublin, then as a chaplain in England until the Restoration drove drove him home. Then more recently as ambassador at court, had been spent in the old country. Yet London, though it still bore the scars of plague and fire, what was Boston but a mean country town where cows graze and pigs rooted and and the and the through thoroughfares, and how pitiful were the pretensions of little Harvard compared to the seasoned scholarship of Oxford and Cambridge. Wow, seeing it called Little Harvard. How much better to leave Harvard and Boston with with it to his eager son Cotton, who, having known no better, supposed that here was the university and here a metropolis. But there is no discharge in God's holy war. Matter stiffened his back and looked at the portly figure beside him. His heart lightened. Let his enemies say what they would about the charter, they would not deny that he was bringing them a proper governor, one after their own heart. And Sir William Phipes, I think his name is Phipes, and he was quite literally Sir William. In reward for signing the charter, he had been given nearly a free hand in naming the crown's appointees. Sir William as governor and William Stalton as deputy governor had been his choice. Sir William was no stranger. He was a New Englander and born and bred, and what is more, a man of the people. He had not been born to high degree, but had been elevated to it as the climax of a remarkable success story. There was an element almost of the fabulous about him. When young girls like those in Salem Village brought in unhallowed means to learn the identity of their future husbands, what they were inevitably hoping for, something like Sir William, a shepherd who would rise, if not like David of old, to kingship, at least like William of the moment to knighthood. He had been born on 2 February 1650 at what Cotton Mather called a despicable plantation on the river of the Kennebec. His father had been a gunsmith in Bristol, and his mother, obscure, otherwise demonstrated the soundness of her stock by giving birth to 26 living children. Oh my goodness, 26 children. 21 of them boys. William had grown up in the wilderness of Maine, innocent of all learning except the ways of wood and shore and lore of the Indians and the calling of a shepherd. This is something that I really do wonder. Like the people who like grew up like in the woods, right? In like the country away from the city, how could some of their life be lived and the Puritans not come and call it witchcraft and put them to death even though they're just living normally? That's something that I do not understand how like it played out as opposed to like past chapters when they go and they identify someone, calling someone a witch and just sending them off to jail simply because they lived like they always have. Um, let's get back to reading. During adolescence, he had begun to experience unrest and a sense that he had been born to greater matter. In this mood, he appreciated himself to. Sorry, he apprenticed himself to a ship's carpenter, and having mastered the trade, went to Boston to seek his fortune. As one step in this enterprise, he undertook the age of 21 to learn his letters. As another, he married a lady of good fashions, whose friends thought that she was lowering herself in marrying a rough-handed ship carpenter so recently and so imperfectly literate. But the future Lady Phipes, widow of Captain Roger Spencer and daughter of John Hull, as such, she was a connection to Samuel Sewalls. Did not see it that way. She adored her husband and did not require his boastful assurance that he would be captain of a kingship and would one day give her a fair brick house in the Green Lane of Boston. She laughed at such talk. She needed no such guards to be content, but she got them anyway, and more besides, a ladyship, a jeweled cup, and many honors and responsibilities, some of them sorrowful. High adventure won the honors. Phipes had built a ship, sailed to the Bahamas, and raised the treasure of the Spanish galleon sunk on the reef called the the Baileys. He had done so against uh, the met the met the machinations of the tumultuous crew, who, when they found a long labor, such engineering, tedious purpose, to drop their captain on an island and go after the quicker returns of privateering. His men gave no more trouble when the first Spanish chest was heaved over the side of the ship. And at first glance, it appeared to be a lump of rock, being encrusted 6 inches deep with limestone. But when the crust was broken, there was the treasure, bushels of pieces of 8. Thereafter, the men worked with a will and hauled up 6 tons of silver, bullion, quantities of gold, pearls, and all manner of jewels, and all the treasure valued at, I think this is 300,000 pounds. I think that's what that symbol is. It was not the least of Phipes' achievements that he got such a crew and such a treasure safely back to England. He got them there by promising his men a just recompense, a promise that he doubtless kept, as he kept all others, for the bulk of the fortune went to the crown and his backers, his own share, coming to only £16,000. There was a, there was am- That was ample for Phipes to give his lady a fine house he had promised her, and besides, the Duke of uh, Marley sent her a pricey gift, a gold cup valued at £1,000. And King James gave her a ladyship by making William Knight of the Golden Fleece. This distinction was conferred in 1687 when Massachusetts was smarting under the rule of Andros. And all these excitements, Phipes had had by no means forgotten that he was a New Englander. When James, having dubbed him knight, asked him what boon he would ask, Sir Williams promptly requested the restoration of New England's privileges. Anything but that, said the king. Instead, he made his new knight High Sheriff of New England. The honor came to nothing because Andros had no use for Phipes or Phipes for Andros. But when Boston sent the former packing in 1689 and entered into its brief independence, the colony sent Phipes on a successful expedition against Nova Scotia, and on the second, less glorious one, against Quebec. During that time, Phipes had received baptism at the hands of Cotton Mather and membership in the Mather's own second church. The act was proof of his loyalty to New England, for he could have lived royally in Old England, and churches there have invited him to membership. But had Sir William, I knew that if God had a people, it was here, and I resolved to rise and fall with them. He had, however, returned to England in season to help Mather complete his negotiations. It was the circumstance that had given the latter his inspiration. So long as a royal governor must be, Sir William was the right candidate, and so it was. Now, after several weeks with him in the close quarters of the frigate, Mather might have been exposed to an occasional misgiving that this flower of Puritan knighthood was not the manner born so painfully clear. Sir William's temper was quick. When words failed him, he used his fists, and even the admiring Cotton Mather was to call him a man of an inclination, cutting rather like a hatchet than a razor. Also, the words did not fail him. His speech was salty and savory, rather outside the divine's ordinary experience. Still, vigor in speech may be forgiven a man so vigorous as this. There was no meanness in the man. With his quick temper went a quick forgiving. He never held a grudge. Hatchets were, after all, more suitable to the wilderness than razors, and his problems were of the wilderness. The delicate task of convincing Massachusetts of its merits of the new charter was Mather's responsibility. The chief problem that awaited Sir William was that for which he was best fitted, the subduing of Canada. Well, that didn't work out. Which was in Cotton Mather's words, the chief source of New England's misery. Sir William, searching the horizon for the landfall, was part of plans in this direction that another sort of crisis was awaiting his action had he no idea. It was the afternoon of 14 May that the Nonsuch was sighted taking its course uh, taking its course around the islands in Boston Harbor. When the news reached Lady Fifes, vigilant these many days upon her widow's walk, she nearly fainted with joy. By candlelight, the frigate was at anchor, and the new governor and his companion were being escorted to the townhouse. There was no firing of volleys, for this was Sabbath Eve. However, eight com- eight companies of militia attended Sir William to his house and Mather to his, and there were joyous reunions at both. The Massachusetts rested on the Sabbath day and kept it holy, except possibly in Salem, where two or more witches were picked up. And on Monday, the governor set out for the townhouse to begin his duties. This time, there was more uh, demonstrations. Not only the 8 Boston companies, but 2 from Charlestown escorted him and stood at attention while he and his uh, counselors were sworn in. So these people arrested witches even on the Sabbath, I guess, by that statement, because it says the Massachusetts rested on the Sabbath day and kept it holy, except in Salem, where 2 or more witches were picked up. So they were even doing this like on the Sabbath when they were just supposed to be uh, resting. Um, at least the age governor, Bradsheet, the head of the makeshift government, ever since the overthrow of Andros, was uh, relieved. I just say that because I don't know what exactly the Puritans believed in, but besides thinking that they're better than everyone else, but I always thought that doing anything on the Sabbath for them meant that it was not just because it was a Sabbath. Um, so let me reread what I just read. At last, the aged governor, Bradsheet, the head of the market shift government, ever since the overthrow of Andros, was relieved. Or rather, his deputy, Thomas Danforth, was for Bradsheet old and ailing, had much of the time not even been able to get to meeting of the Sabbath, much less to move about supervising the business of the colony. Hereby hung a tale for had Bradsheet been in full possession of his faculties at the onset of the witchcraft matters might have gone somewhat differently. He was a man likely to have scant patience with the sort of evidence called spectral, had been able to attend the examinations. He was only remotely aware of the situation, and decisions in the handling of it had been left to Danforth. Now it was uh, Strutton who took the office of deputy governor, and in the borough's affair, Strutton had already demonstrated his respect for spectral evidence. What viewpoint Sir William's would take remained to be seen. Sir William had no viewpoint. The last thing he had expected when he arrived in Massachusetts was to find a place overrun with witches. He had been bracing himself to attack a tangible enemy. The necessity of dealing first with an invasion from the invisible world caught him unprepared. He was nearly bewildered at the prospect, as had been poor Burroughs. There was, however, nothing of this of the skeptic. Sorry, nothing of the skeptic. The subduee Sir William, a sailor on the Spanish Main, had seen too much of the devil to question his power. That spirits could scald innocent people with brimstone, stick them with pins, thrust them into the fire, and drag them out of their houses and over the tops of trees for many miles together. That's in quotations. These being some of the details laid before Sir William, seemed to him deplorable indeed, but not all improbable. He had this intelligence directly from friends of the afflicted, who now came to him, as he reported later, with loud cries and clamor, demanding his protection. This could be accomplished only by a setting up proper courts to try and condemn the witches. For lack of such courts, because the confusion as to the exact legal procedure to be followed, Massachusetts prisons were filling up with witches, some of whom had not ceased to practice their arts under closed confinement, and could not be expected to do so until they were put to death. They never stopped believing in their gods. Sir William, as innocent as any in the colony of legal training, turned to his counselors and was relieved to learn that they had already devised the proper machinery for trying witches. What was needed, it seemed, was a special court of Oyer and Terminer. When on the last Wednesday in May, the governor's council set up a general's court and later promptly appointed judges to try the witches and arranged that their sitting should begin on 2 June. This accomplished, Sir Williams departed with a clear conscience to attend to the more comprehensible difficulties, to leave Massachusetts more spectral problems in the able hands of William Stoughton. The affair, thank God, would be cleared up and disposed of without him. In departing, he granted a boon to the unafflicted girls. Unthinkable that so many of the witches already taken up should be allowed to work on these poor martyrs for their from their very prisons. Certain experiments had encouraged the authorities to believe that if the witches were chained, such malfaction could be circumvented. Besides, some of the prisons were flimsy pieces of chaining was almost necessary to ensure confinement. According to the governor, authorized the wholesale making of chains for this purpose. The expense would be charged to the several counts of the witches. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. I find this I like reading this book, and I find it very interesting because I also like watch ghost hunting videos, things like that, and people playing around, and I play around with it myself. Technology that is supposed to detect, spectral evidence, as this book puts it. And I just wonder, I guess some ghost hunters that are really famous have tried it already to try and get out of the equipment that they have to see if what they say against this book happened versus what their equipment says. I watched a couple of episodes like that. I found them very interesting. Of course, they didn't have technology like that back then. Um, so I guess that's why when someone cried witch, it was believed so much, because they didn't really have a way to prove anything that was going on other than testimonies of other people and how other people reacted to being in the presence of this supposed witch. Um, yeah, I'm gonna stop reading here for the day.